Okay, everyone, let's get started. It's 8:35 and a few more seconds after that. If you have anything for us, it goes to Mr. Curran. Don't forget to turn off your gadgets, he said, after forgetting to do it. And we'll roll in with a roll call. Madam Clerk.
Bell.
Here.
Curran.
Here.
Freeling. Here. Harrison.
Here.
Hinkleman.
Here.
Majerick.
Here.
Ott.
Here.
Pittsburgh. Ballraff.
Here.
Werfel.
Here.
Yarborough. Elliott.
Here.
Mr. Chair, you have 10 present, 2 absent.
Thank you. Minutes from last week. Who wants to put those in?
I'll make a motion.
Moved by Volrath. Is there support? Supported by Freeling. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Minutes are approved. Do you have some requisitions?
We do, not very many. Does anybody have any questions about the requisition list? Perfect, thank you.
All right. We'll go into the presentation. Tyler?
Started.
No worries. While I get pulled up, I'll introduce myself, but for those who don't know me, my name's TylerAux. I'm a government and community vitality educator with Michigan State University Extension and Michigan Sea Grant. So lots of fancy words. All it really means is I provide training, education, outreach to local community leaders, elected, appointed officials like yourself. Primarily, I deal a lot in planning, zoning, and land use. Our signature program of Citizen Planner you may be familiar with for training planning commissioners, recently hosted here in Berrien County. But doing lots of that great work, the Michigan Sea Grant portion of my work has me doing it with coastal development. So planning, zoning along our Great Lakes coast. We have an email course that gets into the basics of that from Michigan Sea Grant. But I work out of the Van Buren County Extension Office, live in Cass County, and serve generally Southwest Michigan. So if ever there's anything government related, land use, please get in touch with me. It's what we're here for as your extension service. But this morning, here to talk about planning and zoning for solar energy systems. So this is going to be kind of a highlights, brief overview of some resources and some of the presentations Extension has been doing with partners across the state. Really encourage you though, if you have communities or you're interested in more, getting our resource, our sample zoning, our planning and zoning guidebook for solar energy systems we'll talk about here in a little bit. What I'm talking about comes from that resource, and it's really an in-depth tool to help local communities plan and zone for these solar energy systems. So,
Should this move forward?
well, oh, there it is delayed. I did too many all the way. All right, so there was a title slide, a reminder about our civil rights obligations at MSU Extension. The guidebook was written by some really smart people in these fields. They're listed on our first couple of slides here, both working with Michigan State University, our extension, as well as partners from University of Michigan, their Graham Sustainability Institute. So we have a lot of great minds putting together our guidebook. And as I talk about our guidebook and planning and zoning for solar generally today, we're going to start with the context, the why. Why are we looking at this new type of land use? Move into just a brief consideration of some of the scale and configuration issues, and then really dive into that planning and zoning for solar energy systems, a guide for Michigan local government that contains background information and a sample ordinance that I like to call our Mad Lib for zoning for solar. Lots of fill in the blanks for communities to work through and discuss what is appropriate considering their goals as they begin to regulate these new land uses. Yeah, no worries. So first question, have landowners in your community been approached about renewable energy leases, either wind or solar? Show of hands. It's out there. It is happening. These developers are approaching our large landowners. And so it's a sign that we need to begin planning for it. A lot of times when I give these presentations, I get asked, but Michigan doesn't make sense for solar, right? We're too far north, we're too cloudy, there's gray days. This slide is showing a graphic of the lower 48 that measures that solar resource. And really what it's getting at here is, yeah, of course. Oh no. I have a blackout button, I just realized. So that's what's happening there. Hopefully we don't get blackouts with solar energy systems, but looking at this map, you can see, yeah, we're not going to compare to that southwest region of the United States that's up at this 7 kilowatt hours per square meter per day is what we're looking at. But we're in that green area, and really it takes about 3.5 is where we start to get viability for this resource. And most of Michigan is hitting that. We are in that darker greens. There is some variability among the state. You can see we get a little more yellow up in the UP, but just know that we are close, or we have that solar viability, and the resources here. Right.
Stand right here if you want, as long as you're next to the mic.
Hey, I can do that. Another reason we're seeing this developing more is the cost has been declining. So on this slide, we have the cost since 2009, and this is called the LCOE, but it's just the general measurement over the lifetime to produce using this. And the big point about this graphic is since 2009, it's been about a 90% reduction in the cost for solar energy, making it much more viable for developers in our state. And here to talk about planning, zoning, according to our state enabling acts, needs to be based on a plan. And honestly, for a long time, there hasn't really been a focus on energy in planning. And now that we have the scalability, the decreasing costs, and a focus in our state on resiliency, moving to different energy sources, we should really be planning in all communities for renewable energy. As you can see at the bottom, even zoning ordinances aren't addressing some of these renewable energy sources like solar and wind, based on our review that some of our colleagues had done. So it's vital that we begin having communities thinking about how they're going to plan, what their goals and vision are around this, and then updating zoning ordinances to match that. So as we start to think about planning and regulating these uses, we have a couple of tools to help us think about it, start to conceptualize. The first is one that my team uses a lot. It's called this transect. And it's a way that we talk about land from rural to urban. Looking at the far left, we have those natural zones, our wilderness areas, and becoming progressively more urban as we move to the right across the graphic until we get all the way to those highly developed urban core zones. And this is just a tool that helps us think about our land and how it varies based on place. And really, there are spaces for solar energy in all of these areas across the transect. So we need to be thinking through all of them, all the way from that natural zone to our highly developed urban areas. Another important thing to consider, and something that our team has been talking about throughout the state, is the idea of dual use with these solar systems, allowing for more than just solar energy to happen on that piece of land. So here we see some images of a parking structure that has the solar on top, allowing it as an accessory use to that parking structure. We also have a photo of some sheep near some solar panels to illustrate agrovoltaics, or growing food fiber or food fiber or fuel near these solar panels. I didn't touch it that time, I swear. So one of the big things in our guide is looking at this dual use and thinking, okay, where can we co-locate things so that it isn't solar energy or ag land? How do we combine that and have them work together and have a regulatory structure that supports that? Also see this on school grounds or maybe brownfield areas, allowing solar energy development there to allow some productive uses in addition to what's already happening there. But really one of the key things that I'm here to talk about is our resource. This is the Planning and Zoning for Solar Energy, a guide for local governments. A couple additional authors there who have now graduated and going on to great things. But this is going to be your tool to help guide communities. The front end is a lot of background literature review on solar energy and some of the considerations. And then it moves into that Mad Lib sample zoning. This is not a, held up to be the ideal zoning. This is a place for communities to start and begin to work through some of the difficult questions that come into land use regulation. So on that link, it'll take you right to a page where you can download this, I think it's 66-page guidebook for yourself. There's also a webinar linked on that page, a recording of our team presenting in detail about this. I think it's about an hour long. So you can go ahead and watch that. It's only about 45 minutes if you watch it at time and a half. Not that I've done that, but it's there and for you to use and share with communities, please. And going back to that transect, really solar is scalable across all the landscapes. It just depends on what size we're looking at, what the configuration is we're looking at. So moving from the left to right across this graph, we can see we move from that natural area to our general urban areas. And you can see that those accessory uses, whether they're on a roof or a ground, so this would be solar in addition to a primary use, like at a residential or a farm area or those parking structures. There's a place for this. In the natural areas even, these are some visitor centers from national parks that use solar energy to power some of their facilities. Moving down towards the bottom, when it pops back up, that larger scale, these are the principal use. These are our large, big, what we think of as solar farms. Those also have places, can be fit in, probably not in our natural areas, but they can fit in rural, urban areas, even general urban areas. There are some in Kalamazoo, right by their university buildings that are pretty big solar fields. Another thing our guidebook goes into is how we regulate these through the land use process. So this graph is showing across some typical zoning districts, ag, low density residential, industrial, that you'll see often in communities in Michigan. And the guidebook approaches those accessory uses, the ground, the roof mounted, as really think about allowing those by right, a permitted use. So allowing landowners to add that additional energy generation in those existing areas, so long as it meets with the other setbacks, height requirements in that district. Then when we get to those principal use, whether it's a small or a large, and communities can decide what that cutoff is, thinking about putting that through the site plan review, the SPR process in land use, which is an administrative review by the zoning administrator typically, or through the special land use where it may be coming before a body for a deliberation and going through that process. But our guide, again, lays all of this out. The idea is when these developers are looking for land, when communities are setting their vision, they want to have clear guidelines. That's what the point of a master plan is to really lay out that vision for a community. And as we've talked with solar developers, one of the things that they're looking for is really just guidance as they go out into communities. They don't know what the rules of the road are. So they often find themselves in protracted developments where it's back and forth. But if communities can be proactive with their planning, like it's designed to do, they can get out there and sort of plant their flag about, listen, this is what's important to us. This is how we want to regulate this. And then developers can have that sort of efficiency of siting as they look across the state. One of the big decisions we see communities making as they begin to regulate these land uses is what considers a large principal solar use. And the reason it's a big decision is under our sample ordinance, that large principal use kicks in some additional regulations. Maybe that means it goes to that special land use with more detailed site plan requirements, or maybe there's an additional standard like using some of those dual use that we're going to get into here a couple different types of ways that dual use could be implemented to make sure it's not just solar on a piece of land. The first one is ground cover. This could be any number of things, whether it's that forage for like the sheep we saw. They do this over in Cassopolis outside of the MEC headquarters. They'll bring sheep in to graze under their small solar array there. We're also seeing a lot of interesting research happening around agrovoltaics. This is growing crops around the solar energy systems. So we're seeing research being done with this in our traditional row crops, as well as with some fruit crops of particular interest to Berrien County. And also just talking with another extension specialist in this, they're even seeing developments where vertical solar panels are being installed in areas, and that creates a lot more space between the rows to allow different types of crops to grow, or even larger livestock to be able to graze with that smaller footprint from the panels. So know that these things are constantly evolving, but really be thinking about what are the dual uses we could have, even if it's just pollinator habitat or conservation cover. We know we're facing serious issues with our pollinators throughout the state. Planting some pollinator-specific flowers could really help in some areas in providing that habitat for those important insects. Conservation cover could be any number of things designed in consultation with organizations that deal specifically with this, whether it's bird habitat, or maybe there's a particular, we call them ecosystem services, carbon sequestration, soil health, things like that, that maybe we could get with a particular type of conservation cover. The forage, this is that Cassopolis example I was talking about, but bringing in livestock grazing, and hear my colleague Charles Gould talk about this. The sheep are actually really well suited for this because of the particular level of grass that they eat. They eat it before it gets too high to interfere with most arrays. So starting to think innovatively about this and talking with your stakeholders and communities about what are the dual uses we could do in addition to solar, so we get away from that mindset of solar or ag. Pollinator habitat. One of the things we use to score this, it's called the Pollinator Habitat Planning Scorecard. But this was developed, I think, by MDARD in consultation with MSU's Department of Entomology. And it's just a quick way to check and see if this is going to be suitable for pollinators. And this scorecard has been incorporated into zoning ordinances as part of the standards for this dual use. And there is just a sample of what the scorecard looks like. MSU's Department of Entomology, I think it sells a seed mix that would meet this. Happy to provide more information on that if anybody needs it. The other thing I'm here to talk about is just the wealth of resources that MSU Extension, the state, other organizations are putting out there around this issue, because there is a desperate need to begin planning and zoning for these renewable energies. So the Department of Environment, Great Lakes, and Energy has a great website that curates all of these for solar resources and wind. So going there, you can see frequently asked questions. I'll often pull, when I get questions from the community, text right from Eagle's website and say, you know, according to Eagle's FAQ, this is what it says about the lifespan of a solar energy system. They also have case studies and links to a ton of resources, including their zoning for renewable energy database. This is a great way to look up what other communities are doing. They try and keep it up to date, but it's just a snapshot across the state wherever they could find plans and ordinances that were dealing with renewable energy. So if you're looking for sort of what our neighbors are doing, that can be a place to start. Of course, I've talked about our solar energy system guidebook. That is our more recent one. We also have one for wind energy systems. While I'm here to talk about renewables, I figured I'd lift that one up too. But this sample for wind energy follows the same sort of format as our solar one, talking about the generals of wind and then getting into that sort of Mad Lib ordinance to help guide communities through their local conversations about what's appropriate. Of course, it's not just me doing this. This is my team of land use educators across the state. We collaborate frequently, often. Many of them were authors on our guide. We also work closely with colleagues at the University of Michigan. Sarah Mills, one of the leading researchers on planning and zoning for renewable energy systems, and actually sits on her local planning commission, so very well versed in this. Know that we're here as a network across the state to help support you and your communities with this as they're planning, zoning, and having these community conversations. But that's my quick overview. Really encourage you to check out the guide, share it with local communities. The webinar that's recorded there is a great resource on walking through some of the nitty-gritties, but happy to take questions as well or anything else.
Anyone around the shoehorn have any questions?
So can a township through zoning determine the location of a solar farm?
A township through proper planning is key here, and zoning could pick the areas that would be most suitable for that particular land use, like you would with any other land use. One way that we've seen communities approach it is through an overlay zoning district. So after doing a assessment of resources, looking at the physical resources and suitability, as well as other local concerns, figuring out where the appropriate spaces for this use would be in a community, and including the regulations to an overlay district. Our guidebook talks about adding it into existing zoning districts, I think, as those special land uses or as a use permitted by right. But there are a couple different ways to start to figure out what the appropriate places for this land use are.
So if I look at the one slide that you provided to us, it's not just industrial. So the solar is not considered industrial to be restricted to an industrial park.
That is a local community decision, but on that slide that showed the sample zoning districts and where it's appropriate, yeah, it could be appropriate in any number of districts, thinking about those residential ones for accessory uses, or also thinking about those co-location, that dual use. It could very well fit into agricultural districts with the appropriate standards around it to make sure we're co-locating uses and all of those important local concerns that communities have. But no, thinking about it across the broad spectrum of our communities from rural to urban and those different zoning districts. Yes.
Great, thank you.
Terry?
Thank you. It's good to see you, Tyler.
Always.
Appreciate all the resources that are there. My question for you relates to agricultural land and solar. If somebody wants to put land back into strictly agricultural use and remove solar from the land, what is the impact going forward from there? Have you guys looked at that? Have any suggestions for community of what that impact may be?
Yes, so on that, thinking about after the end of the life of a solar energy system, actually looking to the state's PA 116 program, the ag preservation, it actually has been modified in recent years to allow PA 116 lands to go into solar energy production. But there are just some stipulations about that land. The pollinator store card, I think, comes in there, and then also returning that land to productive agricultural use at the end of the project. So you can start to write those standards in. That would then, our sample ordinance includes decommissioning plans to be included as part of the application that would lay out exactly how this is going to be decommissioned at the end of its life. And then we also have some provisions in there about making sure that there are the capital to get that decommissioning done, making sure we've done the proper studies on what it's going to cost. And we're revisiting those studies every several years to make sure when that end of life does come, there is the funds to revert it back to that use, whether it's agriculture or whatever else it would be. But there are lots of things that can be done. Soil compaction is the big thing that I've heard folks talk about in this space. So there could be standards around when work is done to prevent compaction and things like that. I think all these are talked about in the guidebook, but it's an important thing. I don't think we have too many examples of that decommissioning yet, since the lifespan of these systems about 20 to 30 years from what I've been seeing. So we don't have that example yet. We also have in the sample ordinance language about repowering. So in addition to the end of the life, thinking about as these technologies advance, are there provisions in the zoning ordinance to allow the solar energy producers to add those new efficient technologies and expand the lifespan of this particular facility.
Anyone else? Yes, ma'am.
As Terry said, thank you for being here today and all of this information. It's going to be very helpful, I think, for all of our townships and our communities. In regards to the animals, I've also heard that it's not cohesive for all animals. So is it just sheep? Is it harmful to any other animals? Is any of those kinds of concerns that we should keep in mind?
There are, right now, it tends to be the smaller livestock are the examples I've heard the most, just because they are a little less unruly than a full-sized cattle. That gets to be in some issues with cattle. They like to rub and may have an impact on some of those solar panels. So I think right now it's primarily those smaller livestock, and lots of times just bringing them in to graze. We've seen goats used as well. For that, I would encourage you to reach out to Charles Gould. He's the one who's my colleague he's from the ag side of extension and works with producers first on these energy systems, and then came over and started talking about the regulations with us. So he would have much more up-to-date information on the types of livestock as well as other agricultural.
Okay, but no harm to the animals.
I wouldn't think that a producer would be putting animals into a situation to cause harm to them at this point. So I don't know of all the research on all of the different varieties. So, but yes, Charles would be your go-to for that. Yeah.
Anyone else? All right, thank you, Tyler.
Not a problem. Thank you for having me.
We'll move on to public comments. If anyone has anything they'd like to share, we'll need name and town and try to keep it within 2 minutes. Does anyone wish to be heard? Yes, sir.
Jay Ackerman, a trustee with Royalton Township.
We need you on the mic, Jay, just for the audio.
Right there.
Thank you.
Jay Ackerman, trustee, Royalton Township. You touched on decommissioning, assuming that you can't go forward with some new technology and the funds available to restore ag or whatever, let's say ag. Where do those funds come from if we have to decommission this solar plant? Is that something that's set aside by the landowner? Is the township responsible? Is the county responsible? That's my only question. Thanks.
We don't know, but Tyler, if you'd like to chime in.
Yes, Chair, of course. With that particular, it's generally the developer, whether it's through a letter of credit or a bond or something like that. I'll admit I'm weaker on the finance side of things, but it's generally put up by the developer, and there are provisions in the sample ordinance that would speak about how to write that into a regulation.
Thank you.
Jay, my hunch is that there would need to be enabling statutory authority for that, kind of like what we see with landfill closure funds, where there's a statute that earmarks so much per cubic yard to a post-closure fund. Just a hunch, I don't know, but.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else wish to be heard on anything at all? All right, we will move to other business. Anybody have any? Okay, we can break early for committees then if you'd like. Be back at 10:30.